G'day. What happens after an F1 race? Lots. So let me go into some detail so that next time you're watching a race, you'll know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. I'm going to start at the start of the race. While you're watching the cars thunder towards turn 1, the teams are out the back of the garage and in the paddock, and they're already starting to pack up. Anything that's not needed in the race is moved to the paddock and packed away into containers. By the end of the race, it can often be a real mess out in the paddock. More so in a tight paddock like Australia, less so in somewhere like China, which is huge. On the security side of things, about 10 laps before the end of the race, security people gather in certain positions near the paddock. They're given a final briefing, and most of them will be responsible for stopping people entering the pit lane area. Now, races like Monza and Mexico, where the fans are certainly huge in numbers, invade the track and are pretty passionate, you're going to need more security than, say, in Japan, where the fans are very polite and tend to just do as they're expected. Security staff are also in position elsewhere around the track to make sure that people don't enter the track while it's still hot. Of course, that happened in Australia in 2023 and resulted in a track invasion ban this year, which may be reversed in the future. Other F1 personnel are sent around the track to guard vital pieces of equipment. I'm talking microphones, remote cameras, and any other gear which could potentially be stolen. And even with that security presence, stuff has gone missing. At most tracks in pit lane, a security person is positioned at each of these gaps in the fence. That's to stop people getting in. And in Australia in 2023, those little areas were actually boarded up, although people were trying to kick them down to gain access to pit lane. And the reason, of course, you don't want people in pit lane is obviously it's already busy. But there's some very valuable equipment in there, and the teams, if they were mobbed by spectators, would have no chance in stopping them taking whatever they wanted. About 15 to 20 minutes prior to the end of the race, photographers will gather in a certain area. At the moment it's in the FIA garage, and we'll wait for a signal before we run out to Parc Ferme. It wasn't always the case that we queued up in the FIA garage. That came into effect after the drama in Baku last year. So once the lead car is on its last lap, a signal is given and fencing is brought out into pit lane to form up the Parc Ferme area. Parc Ferme is French for closed area, or park. Once those fences are in place, a signal is given for photographers to make their way out to their position, and at that point we are the first to arrive. The teams come slightly afterwards, and it's only crew associated with the top 3 place getters that are allowed to enter. So if it's Red Bull 1 and 2, you've got far fewer people hanging around that area than if you had Red Bull, Ferrari and, say, Mercedes as your top 3. And normally it doesn't take those teams too long to get there because typically the podium is near to the top team. However, in Japan, the top team is situated at the other end of the paddock, so it can be a minute and a half before those crew get to our Parc Ferme area. And which team are the pushiest? Ferrari. You have to really hold your ground. Oh, I nearly forgot. If you're looking for a gift for a friend or family member, you won't go too wrong with one of my F1 signed driver prints or an F1 photo book. This picture was taken at the Japanese Grand Prix. So who do we see here? Well, we have 2 FIA officials. This gentleman here has a plastic bag with the 3 Pirelli hats, which are numbered 1, 2 and 3. This gentleman is an audio engineer. There are 3 boxes there with water and towel on it, and you'll notice that the water bottles have no logos on them. They are clean. And a team hat is placed on the top of each of those boxes, and that team hat would have been given to the FIA official once it was obvious who the top 3 were. Then you have the Red Bull team photographer here, 2 photographers from Getty Images, which is the major photo agency. There's an FIA security officer, a guy with some wheel chocks, as that paddock in Japan is on a decline, so the cars would roll away. 3 TV cameramen and another FIA person here who directs the drivers to where they should park. Now, if we look up the paddock a bit, you can see this gentleman here is directing the non-top 3 finishers as to where they should park. And those drivers get out of their car with no fanfare and head straight to this weigh station with their helmet and hands device, where they are weighed and they are given a piece of paper, and then they are left to head out through the FIA garage. What's on that piece of paper? Well, it's their weight, including their helmet and hands device, and they have to give that to an FIA official who will marry that weight up along with the weight of the car and make sure that the car and driver is not below the minimum weight at the end of the race. And if it is, well, there could be penalties involved. Now, I'll come back to those non-podium finishers in a minute, but let's go back to the top three. They've parked up in their designated spots. They get out, they do a quick celebration. Now, those photographers I pointed out below will typically shoot low. That's for two reasons. A, it's a better shot because you're getting a cleaner background, and B, it doesn't annoy the other photographers who are standing behind the fence. And the F1 TV cameramen, well, they typically get priority, and they can stand if they want. Once a driver's exited their car, they normally head across to their team, their family, celebrate a little bit with them, normally with their helmet on. And after they've done that, an FIA official directs them towards a smaller set of scales where they're weighed before heading back to their box to get a drink and a towel, and put their hat on if they want. At this point, their trainers aren't allowed in. The trainers do end up with that gear though, because either FIA official will hand it to them or the driver will physically come over and hand it to them. Next up, there's interviews for each of those top three drivers in Parc Ferme. Then it's off to a cool-down room, which you might think is private, but indeed it's not, because there is a TV camera that also transmits audio. So they have to be very careful what they say, because the world will be watching and listening. Often they will have had a watch handed to them to wear, and after a number of minutes, it's time for the podium. Now at that point, Parc Ferme is closed to almost everybody, but scrutineers will then start rolling cars into the FIA inspection bay. Now most cars in the points will be inspected, but not all. They'll be looking for things like the width of different parts, brake duct sizes. Anything that needs to be checked can be checked, and if anything's found to be illegal, that car could well be disqualified. And how long does Parc Ferme remain closed? Well, it's probably in the order of 90 minutes. Although if a team protests, say, another team's car, all the cars could be locked up for longer. Let's go now to the podium, where each driver is presented to the crowd. It is third place up first, second place then, and then first place third. And also a team representative comes up. And who picks the person that goes up as a representative from the team? Well, it's the team principal and the hierarchy. And often that person is not identified and selected until the very last minute. Once all the drivers are on their podium, the hats come off and it's time for the Austrian and Dutch national anthems, although sometimes Max doesn't win and we have some other national anthems. That's a bit of a novelty. Next up, it's time for the handing out of the trophies, and it's first, second and third in that order get their trophy. There are two extras. There's a medallion placed around the neck of the winner and a trophy for the team representative. And then it's time for the sparkling wine. And on stage at that time, we have normally one photographer, and it's this gentleman here, Mario Renzi, and a TV cameraman. But for certain podiums, there are angles on the same level as the podium or even above where photographers can shoot. And can anyone go up there? Well, it just depends on the area, but if you go to Japan last week, these photographers here are from select agencies, and as such, they get priority. Now, while all that's going on, all of the other drivers, the 17, assuming that all 17 finished the race, have then spent some time in the FIA garage, cooling off, getting a drink, putting on their sponsor's watch, and then they will head out and see their PR people, and then head to the TV media pen. Now, they could be there for 30 minutes answering questions from the world's media. Oh, and sometimes the drivers, in order to get back to their hospitality suites, if they don't want to run the gauntlet through hundreds and hundreds of fans wanting selfies, they'll quickly nip out into pit lane where it's dead, or there's just trucks packing up, head down pit lane and then jump out through their garage. And occasionally, there might be a celly, like there was for Yuki Tsunoda last race for finishing 10th, although typically that's a little unusual. Now, what about the trophies that the top three get? Well, the trainer normally takes them back to the hospitality suite. And does the driver own that trophy? Not necessarily. In fact, almost always no. The trophies go to the team and they head back to their headquarters, but sometimes drivers get a replica. Now at this point, it's probably 25 minutes after the race is finished, and then the drivers are led down to the TV media pen where they're answering an array of questions from the world's media. Oh, and I forgot, often they leave a bit of champagne in the bottle so that the team can enjoy a swig when they get the bottle back after the race. Although Fernando Alonso often drops his bottle from the podium down to his crew below. So we're now, an hour after the race? So it's now time for the drivers to go to the press conference and answer more questions. Typically, they'll have their PR person sitting in with them, and that conference could go for 30 to 40 minutes before they head back to the garage or hospitality suite. Will there be a celebration photo shoot? Well, certainly for the winner, yes, and sometimes for the second and third place getters. Although Mercedes typically don't do sellies for anything but a win. And it's been a while since we've seen a Mercedes celebration. We're at least 90 minutes after the end of the race, so at this point, typically the paddock has been cleared, certainly the people on the track have been moved off the track, and things are a little bit quieter behind the scenes. But are those top 3 drivers free to go then? No, they'll typically have something to eat, and then there will be a post-race debrief for the engineering crew. So it's not uncommon for a driver to leave some 2.5 hours after the end of the race, if they have been on the podium. Of course, if they have not made the podium, they can probably leave a lot earlier. And if a driver has crashed out, say on lap 1, it's not uncommon for them to just take off. And some could be back at home in Europe with their private jets before the race is even finished, or on their boat, as was the case with Kimi Räikkönen in Monaco all those years ago.
There is Kimi Räikkönen. He's not even gone back to the paddock.
I remember going back a couple of years ago now to when Esteban Ocon won in Hungary, and I was coming back to my hotel, and I found the team principal at the time checking in. What? Checking in? Yeah, he checked out earlier in the day, but after winning the race, a whole lot of the hierarchy decided we shouldn't leave. We should celebrate with our star driver who's notched the first win for that team in some time. But let's go back to the track because there's still plenty of action going on there. The trucks are normally wheeled out, on the European races anyway, onto the straight, so all that gear can be loaded onto those trucks. And at the flyaway races, the sea containers and the air freight containers, which have been stored in a secure area, because that's very important. I don't want people putting odd stuff into these containers, are brought back to the pit lane and stuff is starting to be packed in them. But certainly there's a big rush in the media centre from people who have flights to catch and are doing a mad dash to the airport and hoping that the traffic is not too severe. So next time you watch a race, you'll know a whole lot more about what's going on behind the scenes. If you've enjoyed this video, yeah, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, become a member, and to grab one of my signed driver prints or F1 books or beautiful wall art, have a look at kimillman.com here and at those other sites for a whole host of content. Thanks for watching and stay passionate. G'day, 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 g'day.